So you want to really get Geminis, huh? Like, what makes them tick?
Yeah.
Well, get ready. We are going deep, deep into the mind of the twin sign. We've got these excerpts from Se Pegó el Texto. It's pretty fascinating stuff. By the end, you'll have a whole new perspective on Geminis. Ever wonder why they're so quick-witted, able to juggle a million things at once? And, like, have you ever felt like, wait, did their personality just do a complete 180?
Oh, yeah. That's classic Gemini.
But we're going to get some answers.
A lot of those classic Gemini traits actually go back to their ruling planet, Mercury.
Okay, so let's break down this whole Mercury connection, because it feels like that's a big deal to understanding Geminis.
Huge. In astrology, Mercury represents communication and intellect.
Right.
It governs how we process information, think, and express ourselves. Imagine that part of your brain that handles planning, decisions, problem solving. That's Mercury's domain. And because of that, Geminis have these incredibly flexible, adaptable minds.
It's like they just download new information instantly.
Almost. And it's not just curiosity. Their mental processing speed is crazy.
Yeah.
Think of the prefrontal cortex, that part of your brain that does the complex thinking. In Geminis, it's like it's on overdrive.
Whoa.
Se Pegó el Texto even cites this neuroscience study where people who switch between tasks quickly show more activity in that part of the brain. Sounds pretty Gemini, right?
It does. It's amazing. So does that famous Gemini multitasking come from that mental agility?
Absolutely. Multitasking is all about working memory, another thing Mercury rules.
Okay.
Geminis can juggle tons of thoughts, tasks all at once, like it's nothing. But there's a bit of a catch.
Okay, I was going to say, there's got to be a downside to all that multitasking. Spill the tea.
While Geminis might feel super productive multitasking, research shows it actually hurts their overall efficiency in the long run.
So they might be doing a lot, but are they doing it well?
Exactly. That's the question.
I like that. Quality over quantity.
Speaking of attention, gotta mention Gemini's love for novelty. Drawn to anything new, exciting. There's a biological reason for that.
Yeah. Dopamine. I knew it.
You got it.
Had to be.
Higher dopamine levels in Geminis, it drives them to seek out those new experiences, info, constantly.
So it's not that they get bored easily. Their brains are literally craving that hit.
Exactly. And this craving can be both, a good thing and a bad thing.
Oh, absolutely. Powerful driving force, but needs to be channeled.
Yeah.
This is already making me understand the Geminis in my life so much better.
Glad to hear it.
It's like a light bulb moment.
And we haven't even gotten to the whole twin part of Gemini yet.
Oh, here we go.
That's where things get even more interesting.
Okay, let's dive into this duality thing. Are Geminis really two-faced, or is there a deeper reason?
All right, let's debunk that split personality myth right away.
Please.
Not about two separate personalities, it's their mental flexibility. They shift gears in their minds, adapt to different situations effortlessly.
So what psychologists call cognitive flexibility, that ability to switch between different concepts, tasks.
Exactly. And that flexibility is a huge part of their success. Bouncing back from challenges, thinking outside the box, understanding other viewpoints.
Probably makes them good mediators.
Amazing mediators.
See both sides, help people find common ground.
Natural diplomats. They can navigate social roles with such ease. Like they're channeling Mercury, the messenger god who could travel between worlds.
Ooh, I love that. So not two-faced, just adaptable understanding.
Exactly.
Okay.
I do have to acknowledge that flexibility goes for their emotional world, too.
Uh-oh.
Geminis can have conflicting feelings, moods shifting quickly. You can throw people off.
So it might seem like they're being inconsistent, but it's just how they're processing things at lightning speed.
Right.
Yeah.
And that rapid processing can lead to a tug of war between curiosity and commitment.
Oh, interesting.
Super excited 1 minute, over at the next. Se Pegó el Texto calls this analysis paralysis.
Ooh, I've heard that term before.
Minds always analyzing, reevaluating. Hard to stick to one thing.
So not that they can't commit, their mind's just exploring everything.
Right. And this is where that whole shadow concept from Carl Jung comes in.
The shadow.
Yeah. Geminis are always integrating different parts of themselves. Balancing light and shadow creates some inner conflict, but also fuels their growth.
There's so much more to this than I realized.
Much more complex than people give it credit for.
Yeah.
And to tie it back to that symbolism, think of Gemini's ruling symbol, Castor and Pollux, the twins from Greek mythology.
Okay, yeah.
They represent duality. One mortal, one immortal, one earthly, one divine. It's like a metaphor for how Geminis navigate those different realms within themselves.
Wow. That's a powerful image. Captures that push and pull.
It does. And it perfectly encapsulates that Gemini quest for integration and wholeness.
This is giving me so much to think about. I feel like I'm finally getting what makes Gemini so unique.
And we're just getting started. So much more to explore.
Well, we can't talk about Geminis without talking about communication. It's like they're a superpower, right?
It really is. Geminis are amazing at getting their ideas across clearly. They connect with people through language, and they're often fascinated by words and languages themselves.
Like they were born to chat.
Right. Remember that strong verbal linguistic intelligence we talked about? Big factor here. They can explain complicated things in a way that's engaging and easy to understand. Plus, natural cognitive empathy, meaning they can tune in to what other people are thinking and feeling.
So it's not just talking at you, they're really trying to connect.
Exactly. And that makes them super persuasive because they appeal to both logic and emotion. They'll back up their points, but they also know how to make you feel something.
Powerful combo. No wonder they can talk their way into or out of almost anything. But you said earlier Geminis can struggle to focus. Does that multitasking mind ever mess with their communication?
Definitely can. Sometimes they'll be talking about one thing, then suddenly they're off on a tangent. Brain's already 3 steps ahead.
Like trying to follow a conversation with someone who's flipping through channels?
Perfect analogy. And this tendency to jump around can make it hard to dive deep into a topic. Se pegó el texto mentions this can lead to a bit of superficiality. Lots of knowledge on a bunch of stuff, but maybe not a lot of depth in any one area.
Breadth versus depth, that classic Gemini dilemma.
Exactly. And then there's that whole thing about Geminis being prone to lying or exaggerating, but I think it's more about their ability to see multiple sides of every story. Not intentionally trying to trick anyone. They're just presenting the perspective that makes the most sense to them in that moment.
So they're always reframing the narrative.
Right. Confusing for people who are more black and white, but it's just how Geminis process all that info coming at them.
So patience and understanding are key.
Absolutely. Don't be afraid to just ask them to clarify.
Good advice. So we've got mental agility, communication style. Now, onto another core Gemini trait. Their curiosity. What's the deal with that?
It's more than a trait. It's the engine behind their learning. Keeps their minds engaged, their spirits high. Sebago Texto describes it as insatiable, which I think is spot on.
Yeah.
Always asking questions, new ideas, soaking up info like a sponge.
I'm seeing a theme here.
Yeah.
Got to be that dopamine connection again, right? Brain's wired to reward them for learning.
You nailed it. Leads to what's called enhanced information retention. They learn and remember better when they're truly interested. Not just memorizing, they're making connections, finding meaning.
So their curiosity is actually a superpower for learning.
Totally. And it also ties into their creativity, what we call divergent thinking, that ability to come up with multiple solutions. Curious people are often more innovative because they challenge the status quo, think outside the box.
Sounds like encouraging a Gemini's curiosity is a win-win.
Definitely. But like anything, too much of a good thing. Se pegó el texto warns about cognitive scattering. Too much info, too fast, hard to focus.
Million tabs open in your brain, can't process any of them.
Exactly. Impacts relationships too. They might come across as nosy because they're so eager to understand everything about everyone.
That need to connect, but it can backfire.
Right. And then the constant struggle. Broad knowledge versus deep knowledge. Got to find ways to focus, develop expertise.
Channel that curiosity effectively.
Yes. But here's a fun fact. Studies actually show curious people tend to be happier.
Oh, I like that.
More engaged with the world, open to experiences, find meaning.
So their curiosity is both a blessing and a challenge. Makes them dynamic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, let's shift gears to something a lot of people struggle with. Gemini's relationship to emotions.
Ooh, yes. This I've always wondered about. Geminis can seem so rational, detached, but there's got to be more going on under the surface. Let's unpack it.
I'm with you. I think this is where that air element really shows up. Geminis are about ideas, communication, the intellect. They live in their heads a lot.
I see that. So how does that affect their feelings?
It can lead to intellectualizing those feelings. Instead of just feeling them, they try to analyze them, break them down. Sebago Texto calls this a defense mechanism to protect from vulnerability, from getting overwhelmed.
So it's not no emotions, just a different way of processing.
Exactly. It can make them seem distant, unemotional, when they're just coping the best they know how.
Easy to misunderstand if you don't get it.
Very. And then you've got that duality we've been talking about. Conflicting emotions at the same time. Super confusing for everyone involved. Like their emotional landscape is always shifting.
So how do you support a Gemini going through something tough emotionally? What's the approach?
Patience, empathy, big time. Encourage them to express their feelings directly, no bottling up or overthinking.
Create that safe space to just be with those feelings?
Exactly. But how do they find that balance between the sharp mind and the emotional world?
Good question. Sounds tricky.
It is. But Sepigol de Texto suggests practicing emotional assertiveness, learning to communicate those feelings clearly, directly, no defensiveness, no overanalyzing.
Self-awareness, recognizing the patterns, shifting them.
Yes. And finding healthy outlets for expression, like creative things, physical activity, even just talking to someone they trust.
All good stuff.
Wow.
Now, before we wrap our Gemini deep dive, I want to circle back to something you mentioned, the third house. How does that play into shaping a Gemini?
Huge role. Third house governs communication, early learning, how our minds develop. It's basically the foundation for how we deal with the world. And Geminis, their sign rules this house.
Their home base amplified.
Precisely. This is why they have that insatiable thirst for learning. Lifelong students. Se pegó el texto links this to self-directed learning, where the motivation comes from within. Not for anyone else, just pure joy of learning.
I love that.
And early childhood is a big factor in nurturing that. Encouraged to explore, ask questions, they'll likely carry that throughout their lives.
So important for parents to foster that curiosity.
It is. And their minds are so interesting how they work. Constantly soaking up info, connecting ideas. Se pegó el texto calls it associative thinking. Fuels their creativity, problem solving.
Makes sense why they have such out-of-the-box ideas.
Right. And they need to be in stimulating environments. Intellectual challenges, opportunities to grow, routine, boredom. That's like kryptonite.
So predictability would be a nightmare.
Pretty much. They thrive on variety, mental stimulation, that freedom to explore without feeling trapped.
Makes perfect sense. One last thing. We've been talking about the air element this whole time.
Yeah.
How does that specifically affect a Gemini's learning, their communication?
Great question. It's all about that mental agility, adaptability. Air signs are known for processing info quickly, seeing the big picture, making connections others miss. And Geminis, with Mercury, they're masters of this. Different perspectives, complex ideas, articulating thoughts clearly. It's like their minds are always buzzing, connecting things, understanding the world in new ways.
So the air element gives them that intellectual edge we think of.
Exactly. But, like we've been saying, balance is key. Air can also mean overthinking, getting stuck, retreating into the head when emotions are intense.
Harness the power, but don't let it disconnect you.
Exactly. Delicate dance, but when Geminis find that sweet spot, they shine.
I've learned so much. It feels like such a deeper understanding now.
I'm glad. And this is only the beginning.
We've given everyone a lot to think about. So as we wrap up, what's the key takeaway you want listeners to remember about Geminis?
That even though they may seem scattered, inconsistent sometimes, underneath is a brilliant, adaptable mind, always seeking knowledge, connection. They're multifaceted, they bring a spark to the world, and once you get what drives them, you can really appreciate the magic they bring.
Love that. And if this resonated with you, keep that curiosity going. Explore more about Gemini, astrology, what makes you tick. The world of knowledge is vast, endlessly fascinating, just like the mind of a Gemini. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Okay, before we wrap things up, got to touch on one more thing from Se pegó texto. This whole third house influence. What's the deal with that? How does it tie into Gemini?
The third house, it's all about communication, learning, especially in those early years. Like, it's the foundation for how we process info, interact with the world. And for Geminis, it's super important because their sign rules this house.
So it's like their astrological home turf.
Exactly. And one of the biggest ways it shows up is that insatiable desire to learn. Geminis are like sponges for knowledge.
Always learning something new.
Right. Se pegó el texto talks about self-directed learning, that drive coming from within, not for anyone else, just pure joy of learning.
That's awesome, like this inner fire.
It is. And early experiences matter a lot here. If they're encouraged to be curious, ask questions as kids.
They'll just keep going. Exactly. They'll carry that love of learning their whole lives. And something else the text points out, Geminis are incredibly associative thinkers, always making connections between different ideas.
I can see that.
It's what fuels their creativity, their ability to problem solve in these unique ways.
See the patterns that others miss.
Exactly. Always searching for that connection.
Yeah.
And to really thrive, they need environments that stimulate their minds. Stagnation is like the worst.
So routine would drive them bonkers.
Pretty much. They need that variety, mental stimulation, freedom to explore.
This has been so insightful. I feel like I'm seeing Geminis in a whole new light.
Glad to hear it. And this is really just scratching the surface. There's always more to uncover about astrology, about ourselves.
Well, we've given our listeners a lot to ponder. So, any last thoughts about the Gemini personality? What's the one thing you really want people to take away from this?
I think it's this. Even if Gemini seems scattered sometimes, inconsistent, underneath is this brilliant, adaptable mind, always searching, learning, connecting. They're complex, they bring something special to the world, and once you understand what drives them, you can truly appreciate the magic they bring.
Beautifully said. And if anything we talked about resonated with you, keep that curiosity going. Explore Gemini, astrology, anything that sparks your interest. Knowledge is vast, it's fascinating, just like the mind of a Gemini. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.